Hey all, Connor here from Kamerastore.com with a pretty special treat today. We have the new Pentax film camera. This is the Pentax 17. By the time this video comes out, you should be able to get them somewhere, hopefully on our store. But we got ours a few days early so that we could put it through its paces, test it a bit, tell you what it's like to use and what it is, because they were pretty secretive, what it would be and what it would look like. But now we have it, so we can tell you what it's like. So we're going to start just going over what this camera is, and then we're going to move into some basic first impressions. We'll go outside, shoot a little bit, and show you some results as well. So let's get right to it. The Pentax 17 is a 35mm film camera. It is a half-frame film camera, meaning instead of a horizontal picture at 24 by 36, it takes vertical pictures at, 24 by about 18. Maybe 17, and maybe that's why it's called 17. So you're getting twice as many photos per roll. For a standard 36 exposure roll, you're going to get 72 photos with this. And I think that's a big selling point. One of the biggest maybe complaints that some people have is that film is expensive, and it is. This halves your cost per shot and, makes it more affordable to shoot film. I understand why they did this. There's cameras like the Kodak H35, which are extremely popular, doing pretty similar things, so it makes sense to go with a half-frame format. There are some limitations, obviously, to image quality. It's just a smaller imaging sensor, basically, but there are pros and cons to it. Starting with the lens, it's a 25mm f3.5. That's going to give you about the same field of view as a 35mm lens on full frame or regular 35mm film. So it's a little bit wider than normal, but it's not anything wide. It's enough to capture a good amount of stuff in the scene without it distorting, hopefully at least. I haven't seen the results yet, but by the time this comes out, we will have seen them. It is a zone focus camera, meaning it's manual focus with some clicks. Maybe you can, if I put it by the mic, you can hear it. So it clicks into a few different spots. The minimum focus is 0.25 meters, which is 0.82 feet for the Americans out there, which is very close. But yeah, you have basically full control over the focus in most situations. You can leave it at infinity, or you can, dial it in for portraits, or even the closest one is marked flowers, which I love. I had a lot of flower shots you'll see in the results. Film advance and rewinding is both manual, so you get a film advance lever here. It's a very short throw because it only has to move the film a little bit. And rewind is also manual, which is nice. A big part of what they were talking about with this camera was getting the feel of a film camera, of a mechanical camera, and I think this is a big part of it. You have a manual ISO as well. The ISO goes from 50 to 3200, so that should cover pretty much all films being made today, except for very, very niche ones. For the average consumer, this is more than enough. You have basic exposure compensation that'll go plus or minus 2 EVs. So if you want to make the scene brighter or darker, this is how you'll do it, because this camera is fully programmed auto exposure only. There's a few modes where it's not exactly that, but for the most part, it's fully programmed auto exposure. We have the Viewfinder here. The Viewfinder has some parallax correction lines, basically to tell us how to compensate for the view not being directly through the lens. Because the minimum focus distance is so close, those parallax correction lines are actually quite far down into the viewfinder. So again, we'll have to see basically if I compensated correctly when I took those super close photos, but it could be something that might be a little bit difficult for a new photographer to sort of understand how those work. And then going over this mode dial, this is probably the thing that confused at least us the most around the office. This mode dial is a little weird. So we have a blue auto mode, and then we have a white section and a yellow section. There's program in both the white and yellow. There's a night mode in both. And then in white, there's also bokeh and bulb. So what this actually means is that the white section is there's no flash, and the yellow section there's flash. Pretty simple. And it is nice to have a physical flash on or flash off switch. That's something that a lot of people look for when looking for a point and shoot. Having to reset the flash through menus every time you turn the camera on is a pain. So this is a nice thing. We have the program mode, which The camera picks shutter speed and aperture for you based on the situation. It'll tell you if you're going to be overexposed or underexposed depending on the film that you have. And then there's a night mode, which will use a slow shutter speed. I'm not 100% sure what the shutter speed range on this thing is. It doesn't say it in the manual. The night mode seems to be around 1/8 of a second. I did try it. I went to a museum and tried it in some pretty low light, so we'll see how bad those came out. Then there's the bokeh mode, which is pretty silly, I guess. If you're not familiar, bokeh is basically a word used to describe the quality of the out of focus areas of a photograph. So if you've ever seen those pictures, like a portrait especially, with a subject who's very sharp and then a background that's very blurry and smooth, the quality of that background is bokeh. And this mode basically just locks the lens at its maximum aperture, which is f3.5. And then I'm pretty sure it still does program to pick the shutter speed for you. And then there's bulb mode, which basically will hold the shutter open as long as you hold this button down. There is a threaded cable release on the back of the camera here, so you can have a cable, hold it, release it. It's pretty advanced for what this camera is, but it's there if you want it. And then with the flash, you basically have full program, that same night mode, so it'll do a slow shutter speed but still fire the flash, which you can use for some cool creative stuff. And then there's the auto mode. And the auto mode is where, for me at least, we started running into some weirdness. So auto mode is pretty simple in your head. It is automatic. It does everything automatically. But when I read the manual, auto mode does some interesting things. Auto mode is the only mode where the camera can pick if you need a flash or not. And in auto mode, it ignores the focus that you've set here and is fixed focus. I don't know what that focus distance is. It doesn't specify in the manual. We did use it. I tested this as well as Nico. Both of us use this auto mode, so we'll probably be able to tell where that focus distance is. But it's a pretty interesting decision to make this main mode be fixed focus. I understand why they did it, again, comparing it to something like the Kodak H35, which would be fixed focus, or a disposable camera, which I guess that's the market that this camera is aimed for, people who sort of want a little bit more than that, and maybe are scared they'll get focus wrong, so that fixed focus can kind of be helpful for them. Related to the build quality, the camera is fully plastic. There are some bits that maybe have a bit of a metallic kind of treatment, but they're plastic. At best, it feels like a slightly thinner version of something like a Canon AE1, which again is plastic with a sort of metal treatment to it. But this side plate, this back plate especially, very plasticky. It's quite light as well. We can get the weight and put it on the screen here. But it is more solid than I think my first impressions were. When I first took it out of the box, I was a little put off by how plasticky it was, but it is more solid than I first thought, and it does feel nice in the hands. This grip is great for someone with my sized hands, slightly maybe above average. I think it fits quite nicely. It is a slightly bigger camera than a lot of other half frames. I think this was mostly done to make it comfortable in people's hands. I think it probably could have been smaller, but you know, whether or not it should be as small as possible is pretty subjective, and yeah, wouldn't fit in everyone's hands then. As I mentioned earlier when talking about the modes, the camera does have a built-in flash. It's a pretty small flash, as you can see, but it should be powerful enough to handle basically portraits of friends, to, you know, shoot people directly in front of you. A lot of, especially older half-frame cameras, won't have a built-in flash, and so you'll have to get a third-party flash and figure out how to connect it, and this makes it a lot easier for people. So we have the camera here. We've been looking at it. What else do you get? So this is the box that it comes in. It's just a pretty standard white box. Aside from the camera, you'll get these items. You will get a start guide, instruction manual in just about every language. Just kidding, like maybe 10 languages, 15 languages. You get a wrist strap here, a small black wrist strap. We have a silver one on here, this was one of ours. And then a lens cap. So it's a 40.5 millimeter lens cap. The camera can take 40.5 millimeter filters as well. So if you want to put a colored filter on or a star filter or some creative thing, they're out there. 40.5 isn't the most common size, but it's a pretty common size. And yeah, that's your lot with this. It's not not too much in the package. Let's head outside and shoot a little bit, and we can talk about how it's actually like to use. We're outside now with the Pentax 17. Let's see how it is to actually use. So as we said, the Pentax 17 is a zone focus camera. That means that it's basically manual focus, but it clicks at a few different distance settings. We have from mountain to flower, so far to close. You have these pictograms on the top of the camera, and there's also a distance scale here on the bottom in feet and meters. One interesting thing that I noticed is that you're not actually changing the focus when you do this. The focus will jump into place when you half press the shutter button here. So I guess you can probably see it moving. This is what happens when it's on the flower setting, and that's infinity. So it's sort of using an autofocus motor, or at least the same kind of motor they would use for autofocus, which it's not direct manual focus, it's sort of focused by wire. It's an interesting choice. I get why they did it, because they make cameras that have this kind of motor. Digital ones, so it's probably the same motor you see in like the Pentax WG series of digital cameras. It works well enough here. It's fast because there's no sensing that has to be done. It just moves to a specific distance, so it works quickly enough, and I don't see any issues with it. One thing that is nice is when you're on the flower or food settings, so those close-up focus settings, and you have pressed the shutter, you will get a blinking blue LED in the viewfinder just to remind you that you're at that close focus setting. So pretty nice if you forget. Like I said before, the auto mode is a fixed focus mode, so it's not going to react to you changing the focus on this zone focus thing. At the distance, something like what we are now, it'll be totally fine. I don't really know what that minimum distance is going to be. That's sort of where you may run into some issues. Maybe it changes depending on the light, maybe when it uses the flash. It's hard to tell, but yeah. Just be aware that it's a fixed focus. One thing to note is that you can see your focus zone in the viewfinder. So there's a little, well, it's just wide enough that you can see these little pictograms when you're looking through the viewfinder. Also in the viewfinder are parallax correction lines. So because you're not looking directly through the lens, there's some compensation that you need to do. These parallax correction lines end up being sort of right in the middle of the frame, which is a little bit distracting, at least at first, but you get used to it pretty quickly. And then actually it works out so that you can kind of use them as like rule of thirds lines, which I found to be even a little bit useful. I think it's a pretty good viewfinder overall. So, yeah. There is something that we all noticed right away about the battery grip that is a little bit questionable. So the battery door is held behind this silver screw. That just comes out. So this grip is going to be really easy to lose. And if you lose it, it's just naked battery here, which is kind of a bizarre choice. Putting a hinge there or allowing this screw to sort of stay attached to this at all times doesn't seem like it would have been that hard. In use though, it's actually really doesn't bother you. You'd think it might because it sticks out quite a bit from the battery grip, but I really never noticed it. So I don't think you will either. So one more thing I noticed is that the frame counter is pretty small. It has to count all the way to 72, so there's a lot of really small tally marks that get you from 0 to 72. It makes it really hard to tell specifically what shot you're on. Basically you say I'm somewhere between 16 and 20 and it counts up in intervals of 4 like that. This is a super common thing with half frame cameras. They just have to count really high, so it's not that big of a deal. You just basically shoot until it tells you not to. Let's go get some film developed. Let's go scan some negatives with our Valois system, and we'll discuss the results back inside. And we're back. It's been a few days. We've taken some time to develop and scan a few rolls with the new Pentax 17. And we have them here. So some finished negatives. I can take a look. Oh, that's upside down. Oh, cool. Yeah. Oh, I love that shot. Oh, did you want to see them too? Oh, sorry. I have them on the computer. So we'll start with some photos taken with Santacolor. That's our sort of in-house color film. It's very vibrant colors, especially oranges, purples, sort of warmish tones. So you'll notice that a lot with these negatives. or with these positives, because these are edited. This was in the full auto mode, so this is that pan focus mode, but relatively sharp throughout, especially for half frame. You'll notice a lot of grain, especially in these deeper shadow areas. That's sort of just how half frame is, no matter how good the lens may be. And you can see, and we'll see later, that the lens is pretty good. You're always going to get, it's just a limit of the size of the negative, basically. But if you look at the bottom here, I mean, these clouds, you know, are pretty well defined for what they are. I think this really shows just how sharp this lens can be, this picture of the church. The edges here on the steeple are really well defined. And I think, especially with Santacolor, that sometimes not suffers, but has halation, so the edges can get a little bit glowy. I think it's really impressive just how sharp these edges are against the sky. You can kind of see the halations on this street light to the side, but pretty impressive. I think taking pictures of leaves on a sky background is a really good way to see how sharp a lens is. But yeah, this 35mm equivalent lens is pretty good, I would say. I mean, I've shot a good amount of half frames, and some of them have really bad lenses on top of a small imaging area, so pretty bad image quality overall. But not this one. And here we have two of our employees. We have Roman and Alexei working incredibly hard. It looks like a Renaissance painting, kind of, the way Alexei's holding the camera. Yeah, and some more of our employees are in the office. These were taken with the flash in that program mode. I forget what I had the focus set to, but yeah, if you're going to, you know, be taking pictures mainly of friends at parties or events or whatever, I don't know if you ever need anything more than this. I think the grain from it being half frame is even kind of nice. It gives it a bit of a filmic look. And for social media, you're never even going to notice it, because if you're posting to Instagram or TikTok or whatever, it'll never even get the size it is now on this screen. And I can, from where I am, barely see the grain. So I think it's really pretty nice. And then back to some sort of outside photos. And this one, Nico took this one. Nico has one roll in here and I have two, but this is a really nice photo that I think again shows just how sharp this lens can be. I mean, there's a good amount of detail in these shadows. That looks really nice. Yeah, I really like this one. And I guess this was Portra 400, so now you're starting to see maybe the differences in color profile that different films can have. Again, yeah, this is Portra 400, and that's very sharp. I mean, if you told me that this was full frame, I wouldn't think to question it. And looking at this one, we have sort of the sun behind some clouds and giving this sort of God ray effect, as they say. I took this one at all three exposure compensation settings, so 0, -1, and -2. Editor to almost please put all three up so we can see sort of the differences that exposure compensation is going to give us. It's a pretty small difference. 2 stops sounds like a lot, but it's really not that much. I think this is a really good one for seeing the sharpness as well. This is Santacolor again, so you can see some of these halations around the edges of the leaves, but really, especially for half frame, the details on these boats are all there. I was really impressed. I don't want to say I had low expectations, but half frame does come with its own limitations for image quality, and you know, these could easily pass as full frame. Well, there you go. That was going over pretty in-depthly the Pentax 17. This camera retails for 579 euros here in Finland. That's including VAT, so the price might vary a bit depending on where you are and obviously what currency you're using. I think it's a pretty good camera for what it is. I think that it has a very clear audience in mind, sort of people graduating from low-end point-and-shoots, disposables, maybe the Kodak H35. And for those people, I think it's really going to be a great choice. On top of being a good camera, and a good camera to use, in my opinion, I think it's a really good thing for the community to show that a major manufacturer like Pentax, someone that still does make cameras and, you know, still makes digital stuff and still is innovating in its own way, has people in the company that are interested in film and are interested in keeping film photography alive and producing new things at a high level of build quality and a high level of performance as well. That's always a good thing. The more we go on as a film industry and community, the more cameras will start to break down that were made 40, 50 years ago. So to supplement that, we're gonna need new cameras. And having stuff that's not basically reusable disposables is really nice. So I'm happy to see Pentax make this. I wish them good luck in selling it. and wish them good luck in the rest of their roadmap and hopefully giving us a bunch of different cameras with different feature sets and yeah, all kinds of stuff that'll be good for the community. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Link below if you want to get your own Pentax 17 from us. Thanks.